Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for downloading Sound Bites on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. This is Season 2, Episode 9. Okay, so today we're talking about vitamin B6. If you've been following along, we've covered vitamin B9, B12, magnesium, and in the vitamin B9 or B12 episode, we talked a little bit about how vitamin B9 and B12 and B6 all can mix together, and they're necessary for many different functions, and you kind of need a lot of them and all of them in certain scenarios. So today I thought we would cover vitamin B6. So one of the things that we want to always remember when we're looking at vitamins in general is that we need them for different metabolic pathways. Well, one of the things that B6 is really important for is that it along with vitamin B1, which is called thiamine, vitamin B2, which is called riboflavin, and putting all those together with vitamin B6, they can be they're necessary for metabolic pathways, but they also there's a increased need for athletes and active individuals because of the exercise stresses that we put on our bodies. So because of that, there are some different reasons why we can come up with deficiencies, particularly in vitamin B6 when we're looking at athletes and active individuals. So we can see that just simply because there's a decreased absorption of nutrients during exercise or training. And then we can also circle back again to gut health, right? If we need a healthy GI tract and bacteria and microbiome so that we can absorb nutrients. So if there's anything falling apart there, I recommend going back and listening to some of the previous episodes where we talk in depth about gut health. But just to mention it just briefly again, there's a couple reasons why we can see nutrient deficiencies pop up. But also we need vitamin B6 for a couple of other reasons. We see it with the turnover in cells. So thinking about recovery a little bit there, we'll talk about that again. We can also see with athletes increased metabolism, which means that you need a lot more of these different types of nutrients. So vitamin B6 is really necessary for things like the metabolism of proteins. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. And then also we need vitamin B6 for things like biochemical adaptations associated with training. So that means, when you train and when you work out, you're not normally getting those adaptations from the training itself. And so that time that you're actually working out, you're actually getting those adaptations from afterwards. So throughout the rest of your day. So vitamin B6 can actually be implicated and help along with those different types of adaptations that happen to exercise. I mean, think about, your aerobic and anaerobic training, when you're able to work out for longer periods of time, thinking about swimming, for example, you're able to hold your breath for longer periods of time. All of those are biochemical adaptations. And so vitamins and minerals, and in some cases, vitamin B6 is really necessary for those types of things to occur. Also, vitamin B6 is needed for in increased concentrations of mitochondrial enzymes that require certain nutrients as a cofactor. So vitamin B6 is really necessary for energy production, which is again another thing with athletes that we're always looking at. And I think also just from a health standpoint, we want to not have fatigue, right? We want to have energy. We want to be able to do what we need to do throughout the day. And vitamin B6 is one of those that, especially in athletes where we see a lot of these. So when we have the mitochondria doing their thing, generating ATP, they do generate a significant amount and they need a certain amount of enzymes, but they also produce a lot of metabolites. And because of that, we need vitamin B6 and different types of antioxidants in order to make this process happen and not get super toxic. So there's a couple of pieces there. And then also, of course, with athletes, as we mentioned, you need it for tissue repair and adaptation to exercise. So that's a brief introduction to what can happen with nutrient deficiencies and why it's important for athletes specifically to be looking at things like this. But let's dive into specifically what vitamin B6 can do for you. So B6 is necessary for the formation of red blood cells. So you need your red blood cells because it carries oxygen. Well, vitamin B6 actually helps in making hemoglobin. And what you need hemoglobin for is for carrying oxygen. It's what binds it to those red blood cells. And then it's through those red blood cells that you then take that oxygen and iron and heme and all of those things, and you're able to get them throughout the body. So going to your muscles, to your brain. So, and oftentimes I think people have heard that a lot of athletes will go and train in high altitude places. So for example, in Colorado, there's the Olympic Center. Well, one of the reasons they do that, one of the reasons, there's many, but one of the reasons that it can be nice to train in high altitude is that over time, you will make even more red blood cells so that you can carry even more oxygen. And so then when you go down to sea level to compete, you potentially have an advantage because you have more oxygen holding capacity, right? So just one of the reasons why, and how, if you think about that whole process of how we make red blood cells, vitamin B6 is really necessary for stuff like that. But because of that, and because vitamin B6 is needed for making hemoglobin and carrying oxygen, a deficiency in vitamin B6 can actually lead to anemia. So when we talked about vitamin B12, we briefly talked about vitamin B12 anemia and even iron deficiency anemia, which we will talk more specifically about iron here coming up because it's one of the most common ones that you see with athletes. But anyway, vitamin B6, because, it can lead to an anemia just because of how this whole process forms. So just remembering and a great reminder that when we are looking at vitamins and minerals, even though in this podcast, we're highlighting each of them individually, I'm hoping that we are at least showing you how they, even though they seem to be in their individual places, they really do interact with each other. So it's pretty important to make sure that we are considering all of the interactions when we're looking at things like that. So, but continuing on with that, so you also need vitamin B6 for forming new antibodies, which is really important right now, I think, and then also neurotransmitters too. So just keep in mind that vitamin B6 is really necessary for a lot of the formation of different things that we need just in our normal daily function. Also, vitamin B6 is really helpful for keeping glucose and our blood sugar levels in normal ranges, which is another thing that is extremely important for athletes, but also just keeping in mind just general health, having a good metabolism, and also making sure that you're keeping your blood sugar levels stable is very important. Also, vitamin B6 is really necessary for things like energy production, which we mentioned, and also resistance to stress. So again, another really important reason to keep vitamin B6 around, especially for athletes. Okay, and then so there's lots of reasons why we need vitamin B6, but there's another one. So we also need it because it plays a really important role in the metabolism of proteins. So all those amino acids that we're trying to optimize, right, for recovery and for building healthy muscle. You also need it for carbohydrates and fats. So it means that the more of those foods, right, the more protein, the more carbs, the more fats that you bring in, you're going to need more vitamin B6 as well, because it's part of what breaks it down and metabolizes it. So just keep that in mind, that vitamin B6 is pretty darn important. Now, one of the things we always talk about at the end is food sources, of how you can get more of these different types of vitamins and minerals into your food, because it's better if you can eat them from whole foods versus take in supplemental form. But I want to highlight how awesome just normal whole food is, because a lot of the sources of vitamin B6 are in things like meats and animal protein. So it almost is like it's just naturally there for you because the body's going to need vitamin B6 in order to break down and metabolize protein. Well, that's where it usually is, right? And that's where it usually shows up just in nature. So really, really important, I think, to stress that whole foods are some of the best ways to get this, any type of vitamin and mineral. And usually there's a bunch of them that are all in one. So but keeping in mind, one of the things that used to not really be a thing was vitamin B6 deficiency. So we didn't really over time, where nutrient deficiencies really came into play was kind of a brief history lesson here. When we saw vitamin C deficiency was when we started realizing that there was such a thing called scurvy. Another one would be rickets and vitamin D. So we've seen this pattern over time of these certain weird kind of conditions popping up and then being able to correlate it to specific vitamins and minerals. Well, vitamin B6 wasn't really a deficiency thing that we really saw until around the 1960s. Then people started kind of correlating, doctors, scientists started correlating that vitamin B6 can be helpful for treating things like carpal tunnel syndrome, some types of depression, as we've sort of mentioned also with vitamin B9 and B12. Just B vitamins are extremely helpful and for the brain and for brain health. So I think we can kind of say a B complex of all the different ones can be really helpful for health, mental health. Also, we've seen things like asthma, premenstrual syndrome. So PMS is one of your biggest ones with vitamin B6. So I often talk about that with reproductive health. Vitamin B6 can be extremely important for making sure that we just have normal periods, right? And for females, I think for women, it's just a really hot topic, I think, in a sense, just because so many athletes and women in general just don't have very great periods. And that's something that would be great to see more people get a hold of, because it doesn't really have to be as bad as it sometimes is. But also vitamin B6 can also be necessary for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that's ADHD. So I think going back again, we can see the effects that vitamin B6 can have all over the body in many different areas, both mental health to reproductive health to lungs, many different areas, and even carpal tunnel syndrome. So looking at, again, that nervous system, but peripheral, right? So away from the brain. B6 is a great vitamin to kind of look at if there's, and it again is implicated in a wide range, just like vitamin B9 and B12. There's a lot of different areas and different types of conditions where B6 can be really helpful. But, one of the reasons why it's from the 1960s, we've been seeing more and more of deficiencies, specifically in vitamin B6, is that we started to see an increase in toxins in the environment. And I won't harp on this very much, but I do think it's important to mention because some of these are antagonists to vitamin B6. And if we're really looking at it, look at vitamin B6 and why we could be deficient, I think it's important to mention because some of these antagonists are specifically, the toxins are called the chemicals are called hydrazines and hydrazides. And you're going to see a lot of those in the petroleum industry. So we're looking at airplanes and, so people who might work in the aviation fields, anywhere, around that, but also just knowing that a lot of that is in our environment too. You'll also see hydrazides and things like tobacco smoke and some food dyes. So as you may have seen and realized at this point, I definitely recommend eating whole foods that come from the ground if you can, and that are, in their most natural state if we can get them, avoiding things like artificial sweeteners and dyes and colorings and things like that has a reason. And they can take a toll on some of these different types of vitamins and minerals in our body. And that can create a lot of, different issues for the body just in and of itself of eating those types of foods that contain, different chemicals and things like that. So that's why I wanted to mention it, but we're going to quickly move right on So where can you find vitamin B6? So you can find it in potatoes, actually, which is a great source of vitamin B6. You can also find it in bananas. You can find it in whole grains. So not just wheat, but you can also find it in, rice and quinoa, anything that would be considered a whole grain. You can also find it in poultry, so chicken, fish, meat. So any different type of animal protein, you can find vitamin B6, which again, mentioning above is really great because you need it, right? In order to break down those amino acids that just naturally come from, food sources that come from the earth, which is the most amazing thing. It's like it was planned. Okay. So that's where you can find it in food form, and get it naturally. So that is usually where we tend to wrap up these episodes. But I just wanted to mention one other thing because I think vitamin B6 is really important for pregnancy and breastfeeding. So here's a little plug for you. If you want to go to Mum's the Word, it's on Wisp Sports, so you can find it at wispsports.com. But if you can, go and subscribe and download those episodes for specifically Mum's the Word, because it is an entire podcast all about pregnancy for athletes, women who are getting pregnant, want to get pregnant, who, telling their pregnancy stories and how that all correlates with them being athletes. My particular episode is going to be live on October 27th. So I highly recommend going and checking that out because we're talking all about nutrition and pregnancy. So what are some of the reasons why vitamin B6 is necessary for pregnancy or some other types of symptoms? So for women who are both pregnant or breastfeeding, vitamin B6 is necessary to keep your body not only healthy, but it's also crucial in the development of a baby's brain and also their nervous system development. We talked about this too with vitamin B9 and why folate is really important for their development and taking those, prenatals. We also talk about that on that podcast as well. So I do highly recommend going and checking that out and subscribing to that podcast. Also, vitamin B6. So this one's kind of interesting because you don't hear about it very often. You hear about things like ginger and some other different types of ailments for morning sickness, but B6 combined with ginger can help to ease some of those symptoms related to morning sickness. So I thought that might be kind of fun to put in there because it's a little bit more random. You don't hear about it very often, but if you look at vitamin B6, it pops up over and over and over again. It may be helpful for morning sickness. So it might be worth looking into. But I also wanted to mention this too, because vitamin B6 can actually be really helpful for preventing and treating certain types of conditions that are associated with pregnancy. So, I as you'll hear, if you go check out that podcast with Mum's the Word, you'll see that we talk a bit about why it can be important for planning for pregnancy if you get that chance. And the reason for that is that, if you can kind of work on your GI health, if you can work on your detoxification, pathways a little bit, then it's less likely that you'll pass on some issues to the fetus and to your kiddo. But also we can make sure that you've got tons of vitamins and minerals set up so that you can do the things and have everything accessible for what you're going to be doing, which is growing a baby. But I wanted to mention it because vitamin B6 can be implicated in recurrent miscarriages. It can also be implicated in gestational diabetes and also preeclampsia. So think about it this way. If you have some of those things in your, health history where, your mom or grandmother or somebody in your family has had a frequent issue with some of those different types of conditions, then it might be worth looking into and maybe just getting a little bit more information for yourself about vitamin B6 and some of your different types of vitamins and mineral levels, so that maybe that could be something that could be prevented or at least treated. So also, lastly, the kiddo, the growing fetus, the baby does also need vitamin B6. As we mentioned, it's really important for growing a baby's brain and nervous system development. It's also, and we mentioned this before, you need vitamin B6 for producing different types of neurotransmitters, specifically norepinephrine and serotonin, which are extremely important as signal messengers throughout the body. So vitamin B6 It is an extremely important vitamin, as you've noticed and may have seen. And specifically with this one, it does have some things that it can specifically help with for athletes and active individuals versus it just being about health, which has been some of the other ones. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. You'll be able to see links to the references, as always, on wispsports.com. Please make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels, and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back in a few weeks with another breakdown of a specific vitamin or mineral.
Hoy volví a pensar en los días que estaban por venir. Decidí desviar mi camino muy lejos de ti. Dime si mentir nos haría sentir un poco más iguales. Ya no sé si voy o si vengo de lo que soy a lo que fui. Tal vez por un tiempo fuimos la misma persona. Y ahora solo es un espejo.